Boom. And we are live with another episode of the Brownwater Banter podcast. My name is Jared Seymour.
My name is Joey Cates.
It is Joey Cates, and we're coming to you digital today on a surprise attack episode of the Brownwater Banter podcast here. We have a killer guest, man. We're so excited. We have astronaut Fred Haise, who, if you don't know, was on Apollo 13 and is a Biloxi native. So it fits right in our wheelhouse right here. We're going to be talking to him about growing up in Biloxi, about becoming an astronaut, about being on Apollo 13. It's going to be a really good show. So y'all stick with us. We're going to jump into it. But before we do that, like we always do, we got to thank the people that keep the lights on for us over here. Right out of the gate, Dr. Robbie Williams over at Southern Magnolia Smiles. If you're looking for a great local dentist, you can find him on the socials at Southern Magnolia Smiles on Facebook or Instagram. They're located on Washington Avenue right here in Ocean Springs. So if you want to book that consultation, it's only 3 more days of 2025, the year to brush your teeth. So give them a shout at 228-215-1202 and tell them Brownwater sent you. If you find yourself in need of legal representation for any reason, Taylor and Cox Law Firm is right here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. This is Tyler right here on the photo, man. They specialize in felonies, misdemeanors, DUI, BUI, family law, divorce, child custody. If you yourself or someone you know needs to be represented here on the coast, give them a shout. 228-696-0111 and tell them Brownwater sent you. If you're ready to kick off that New Year's resolution starting in January, you might want to go ahead and give Forever Young Men and Women's Health a call. This is Kendrick right here. He specializes in optimizing men and women to get them back feeling better, moving around, back in the gym, just overall being healthier. Their motto is bring in medicine, health, and exercise together to help men and women live their best lives. So, like I said, January's rolling right around the corner here in a couple days. So give them a shout. Take care of yourself and make your health a priority. You can give them a call at 228-363-66. And again, I want to send you. We want to thank the sponsors for supporting us, but it's time to bring Mr. Fred in here and get to chatting. So let's see. We still good, Joe? You can still hear me?
Yeah, you're skipping again.
Dang. Okay. Fred, how are you doing today?
All right, I'm good. Made it through Christmas. Probably gained about 5 pounds with all with all the family activity and lots of good food.
Well, that's what the season's all about, and so glad to hear you had a good time. First off, thank you for jumping on this stream with us here. I hope my audio is good. Joey, let me know if it starts to get bad. You take over.
Right.
But we appreciate you jumping on here. Whenever we found out this was a possibility, my elementary school self, man, just was like couldn't believe it. I've been a fan of NASA and space exploration since I was a kid. And if you haven't heard the Apollo 13 story, you'd have to be living under a rock. So we always like to start with our guests, the backstory. And with yours being from the Gulf Coast, could you just tell us, born and raised here in Biloxi? That's correct, right, sir?
Yes, 1933. It was actually still some leftovers of the 1929 crash. I can remember City Park. There weren't many city parks in Biloxi, but one I often was at was right by the railroad station, the L&N station. And one leftover, I remember asking my dad, I saw these fellows holding around an oil drum, which had something burning in it, and it was glowing red in the near darkness, and asking what those people were doing there. Were they cooking or anything? He said, no. He said, those fellows are waiting for the next L&N train to come by that might have a car with it that has a door open they can hop on. Because what they were doing is they were the equivalent of today would call the homeless. They were the jobless people left over from that the 1929 crash. And if they were going westbound, of course, they were going to hop on and go to New Orleans and hopefully find work there. Or eastbound, they're going to go to Mobile and maybe get off and try to find work in Mobile. So that's the world. It was a very small town, Biloxi, relatively, 14,000 people right about that time. No casinos. They had a few hotels strung out along the front, all the way over to Beverly Bay, St. Louis, that had some tourist business, and that was about it. Otherwise, there was seafood business.
Right.
Biloxi at the time had seafood factories. I don't know how many, 4 or 5. I used to go and throw oyster shells from the big pile that was always out there near the water, seeing how many I could skip across. And but one time, I guess Biloxi was about #1 in the country for shipping frozen seafood around the country. And so that was the way it was, a quiet town. I could be free to roam around all the time wherever I wanted. My only family rule was they wanted me to be home by dusk to have supper. And we call it supper rather than dinner, but anyway, to have supper. And so I could run around. I didn't have a bike really till I was 12 years old. So I just run around the neighborhood or wherever I wanted to go, or down to the beachfront. There was no front beach, obviously, at that time either. They had one by Buena Vista, one at Long Beach, small beaches. And went until later in high school. I was in high school. They pumped in all that mud and soot, dark stuff, creating the Intercoastal Canal that built that big sand beach against the seawall. So, but anyway, I'd just run around free, and no, you didn't have to worry about children or myself in that case, being harmed. It's just a nice community in that way, completely safe. And through high school, I eventually got a bicycle, as I said, at 12, and went to work. My dad always influenced that. When I got bigger, I should think about going to work as soon as I could. And because his life, he had been in the Merchant Marine 12 years when he left home at an early age, and spent 12 years on freighters around the world. Then came home and worked at the VA Center at Biloxi. Initially running one of the machine shop, I think it was, and then he ran the boiler room. It made the steam for all the heating around the Biloxi VA Center. And of course, we did a lot of fishing, crabbing right off the seawall. We'd crab with a net to catch crabs using chicken necks and rotten chicken that could smell. And we did a lot of wading at night. Initially, till the major technology invention of the Coleman lantern, we used a flambeau torch. It was on a long rod with some rags and soaked in kerosene, and that was your light. And of course, you'd end up with a face half covered with black soot from the smoke coming off that burning kerosene. And that didn't allow us to go too deep, though. We'd always start maybe at the low tide and go through the shift to go floundering. But then the Coleman lantern came along, and that was a big breakthrough for lighting and be able to flounder deeper. In fact, Dad modified the one we had with 4 mantles rather than 2, using that white gas. So we could even work deeper. And so we did a lot of that kind. We had a cast net and a little wooden skiff that we just parked out front by about Hopkins. They had a pier out around there, Hopkins Boulevard, and just hooked it up to a stake out in the water and left it with the engine on it. Had a 5 horsepower Evinrude. That was a huge, big case. I mean, today the case of that thing would be about a 25 horsepower engine, but that was a 5 horsepower at that time. And again, you could leave it out there and you didn't worry about anybody taking it. When we wanted to go fishing, we had to just wade out to get in the boat and bring a gas can if we needed it and head off. And then cast sometimes just from the boat, or we'd just go out and fishing. And a lot of our evening meals often were what we caught. So we lived a lot off the water, so to speak. Dad didn't make a lot of money, so a big meal on Sunday was normally always a pork roast with stuff with garlic, and very occasionally would get a steak, but not too often. But pork chops quite often too. But that was what it was growing up. At 12, I did get a job. I worked for the Biloxi Gulfport Daily Herald, which is now the Sun Herald. And it was on, I guess, where headquarters was then, was on Jackson Street, just around the corner from where the current City Hall is. And that's where we waited to get our newspapers. They were delivered because they were printed in Gulfport, and they were delivered on a truck. I had Route 16, which virtually stopped and started right at the Herald office. So we just sit around there waiting to get our papers. And like kids, we horsed around. I wrote a book, and I told about some of the things we did. Your initiation, incidentally, when you first got to be a newsboy, was they'd grab you and they'd take your pants off, and you had to go sit in a tree across the street. That's some, I think it was some historic home there, right across the street there, and you had to go sit in that tree till the papers came. But then that was your single initiation. Then you at work though, we'd play games like take two of us, and one would wait on the curb, and when a car would come up the street, one kid would run out quick and lay on the center of the street, and the other kid would run out quick and rap on the back fender. And so the people would think they'd run over this kid laying. Yeah. So we always were thinking of things to do like that to just pass the time. Played baseball with a newspaper rolled up, and the papers wasn't that thick. We could roll them up and bend them almost like a boomerang, tie rubber bands around it, and use it like a baseball, and use this stick from a broom for the bat. So we'd play sometimes baseball that way. But anyway, I did that all through till the junior year when I earned enough money, had gotten a motor scooter, and then got to be office boy. It was an advancement. Joe Wink was the head office boy, and the two office boys that covered the town, and that was myself and Freddie Steminder. So we split the town. Freddie had everything east of the Herald office, and I had everything west, excepting way out by the city limits. Chester Rose was the circulation manager, and his son had the biggest route, over 200 papers, way out in the west. So I didn't have to mess with that route. Chester Rose Jr. had that route. But our job as an office boy was to ride with the boys and load and general the routes, and we would take the route when any of the boys wanted to take vacation. They wanted to be gone for a week, so we'd take over the route. And if they missed papers, and the office got a call for a missed paper, and they couldn't get a hold of the boy, we'd go deliver the missed paper. So that was kind of one of our two major roles in that office environment. But I did go through all schooling 1 year at Sacred Heart when it was coeducational. So my first year, family was Catholic, so I went to make my first communion that first year. And then the next year went to public school at Garnflow. And during World War II, left Biloxi for a year following my dad, who was getting a ship ready in Chicago, a minesweeper in World War II. So I went to school in the 4th grade in Chicago. It's interesting, and I point that out in my book. At that time in Chicago, on this street, which wasn't that far from downtown Chicago, we lived on, it was the same thing of a child being free to roam around the neighborhood at dusk. And I have not been back to that area, but I would guess today an adult wouldn't feel free about walking around that part of Chicago.
Probably not.
Yeah, some parts of Biloxi are kind of that way now too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's unfortunate, but that's I had that year in Chicago, and it was a school that incidentally did not have a blade of grass. It was totally concrete and cinders. So I got dirty every day, messing around the schoolyard, sometimes wrestling and rolling in the ground in cinders. But other than that, I came back to public school, went to Howard 1, which is now gone. Howard 1, I would guess, is right about where the Elks Club was at one time, and the library at one time, and they got torn down too. So that was where Howard 1 was. And then I went to Biloxi Junior High, which is gone now, and Biloxi High School, which is going on Howard Avenue. Graduated in 1950. but a lot of fishing, a lot of times in the water, out front, both fishing, as I said, crabbing, floundering. You see it a lot of night on a good low tide night. You can look up and down that coast when you're at the seawall, and you see those lights out, people soft shelling and floundering up and down the water. I mean, you might look left and right and see 10 people out, which were doing that.
We just had a few episodes back on this show some guys that are out of Bay St. Louis that they make a LED floundering light that's made out of PVC, and even just us, from what we remember growing up using those Coleman lamps that you mentioned with the little what do we see, the paper, the mantles,
right?
These LEDs compared to that, it's like night and day.
No, I can imagine. Yeah.
Oh, it lights up everything. I mean, you can see a radius of a circle. It's unbelievable. But yeah, so technology has changed and come a long ways over time.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you had a great childhood growing up here on the Gulf Coast, and very similar to what we experience with the seafood and the outdoors and stuff. And you mentioned working for the paper, being a paper office boy. You said, I know, doing some research before we spoke with you, what your initial interest before all of the aviation stuff was to go into?
No, I had no interest in aviation at all. In fact, when I finally went in the military to sign up to go in to learn to fly, I had never been in an airplane. Wow. That's even on the ground. But nevertheless, incidentally, the two major figures at Daily Herald when I worked, the city editor was Cosman Eisendrath. And Cosman, because I worked for the high school newspaper, the Bull, and I got a sports editor one year. And Cosman would give me some assignments that Jack Nelson, who was the big time reporter at the time, that Jack didn't want to cover, like Pee Wee football games or whatever. So I get to cover some of that kind of stuff. And E.P. Wilkes was the owner. He owned the newspaper at those days. Till later, he sold it later. He was also my scoutmaster when I was in the Boy Scouts Troop 212. And so it was, again, even that work environment was very nice, working with the kind of people that were there at that time. And
is that
a family situation? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Is that what sparked your interest in wanting to do journalism? Because I believe you went to Perk.
I had planned that direction when I went to Perkinston Junior College when I graduated from Biloxi High School, and that was my so-called major. And I was, again, sports editor the first year, and then I became editor of the Bulldog Barks. That was the Perk paper the second year, which now, of course, is Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. And so I had 2 years there. And that whole area was very small up there. Wiggins was a very small town.
Yeah.
And actually not big enough for the county, that county, Stone County, the high school was actually at Perk, because no one city in the county could foster a high school. So the children that were high school age at Stone County, they came to Perk in high school.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And eventually, of course, Wiggins has grown up a lot bigger.
Oh, it's huge now.
Yeah, right.
So what made you pivot from the journalism into aviation, especially having not ever even been in a plane?
Well, the plane wasn't my interest. What steered me directly was to join the military. The Korean War was going on, and my dad had been in the Second World War on a minesweeper that actually got sunk in the invasion of Borneo, Philippines.
Wow.
In the Pacific. He survived it as well. Everybody on board did. Some got injured. And I had two uncles. One, Uncle Don, who was in the Marine Corps and was on the invasion of Tarawa and then Saipan in the Pacific. And another uncle, Fred also we had a bunch of Freds in the family. He died at the Battle of the Bulge. That's where
Oh, wow.
they were surrounded.
Yeah.
And actually, Patton, his army broke through to cut through and get him out of that position. But he died in that battle at Bastogne,
Bastogne.
Belgium.
Sure. Yeah,
And,
I have a great uncle who was there. He was in a glider infantry unit, and I have the Bastogne plaque. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're kind of valuable in my closet. I have his war medals. He was part of the airborne 101st.
Yeah.
So like I love reading about all that stuff.
Yeah, those gliders were to me look precarious.
To say the least. Yes, sir.
I don't want to be on one.
Yeah,
No.
but, at any rate, that's what had my interest. I figured I should serve my country. And at the time, I had 2 years of college, and I was 18. I graduated from high school at 16.
Wow.
So I had 2 years of college at 18, and the only program and my dad had encouraged me to get into a program that would get me to be an officer, commissioned officer. And the only one that fit was the Naval Aviation Cadet Program. The Air Force required you to be 19. And of course, I probably would have signed up there, although my dad would have wanted me to go the Navy route. So anyway, that's what I did. I signed up and went to Pensacola, and I loved flying from the instant the first time I flew. I mean, it kind of that instantly changed my thought about what I was going to do with my life. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but it was going to be involved with aviation in some way. And so that got me started on that next path away from journalism.
Okay. Yeah. So once you got that first taste, it was like, this is it.
Right. Upon graduation, after my second carry qualification in an old World War II airplane, the F-6F Hellcat, I went to jet training and was assigned to Marine Fighter Squadron, VMF 533 at Cherry Point, flying Banshees. And then was in a second Marine Fighter Squadron, the VMF 114, with swept wing Grumman F9, F8s. And by the time I got into that second squadron, I started thinking, well, should I stay in the Marine Corps for a career? And I talked to my ops officer, had been through Patuxent test pilot school, and read books about things going on at Edwards Air Force Base from Jaeger and X-series airplanes. And I said, well, maybe I ought to think about being a test pilot. And I realized from reading and talking to my ops officer, I would need a degree, further degree in education and engineering. Because a test pilot doesn't just wait around for the airplane to be ready to go fly it. He's part of a test team. Or in the case of a company that's developing a new airplane, he's part of the design team. The test pilot is. What the cockpit should look like.
Right.
Human factors. How you operate the system, so that kind of thing. Worrying about contingencies or failures. And so I went back to school then at the University of Oklahoma for 3 years while keeping current flying in the Air National Guard Squadron, also at fighters at the time. So I was flying reserves and fighters and going to school to get an aeronautical engineering degree. And I searched companies for jobs. And when I first started searching, my squadron commander actually recommended I visit and talk to people at NACA, which was the previous NASA version of aircraft test. They had centers at Langley, Virginia, which is the mother center, first one built in the late 1920s. And then they had centers at Cleveland, Ohio, mostly in propulsion testing, and one at Ames Research Center in California. And the main aircraft experimental test base was at Edwards Air Force Base in California. So I applied to some companies, and then I also applied to the NACA centers at the time. And actual squadron commander, Stanley Newman, who later became a 2-star general, had recommended NACA. He said, a company says you'll get on a new project or a new airplane they're developing. He said, you may spend 4 or 5 years in the development and getting it ready to fly before you actually do the testing. He said, NACA or NASA does routinely does many test programs at one time, looking for safety and performance improvements on different aircraft. And you're getting a wide variety of test programs, a wide variety of airplane experience. So it finally worked out that the first opening I found was at Lewis Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. So that's, by the time I finished school that last year and went to Lewis to work as a test pilot, it had changed names from NACA to NASA.
Mm.
So that was the year NASA became NASA with a space program.
Yes, sir.
So anyway, I started an aircraft test for 4.5 years at Lewis, and then transferred to Edwards. I was actually not interested in trying to join the astronaut program. I was too young, inexperienced for the ones that were chosen originally, and didn't figure I'd fit in that way from a resume standpoint. So I went off to the experimental world at Edwards Air Force Base for another 3.5 years before applying to become an astronaut. And from a standpoint of call it the most fun I had, call it the most return and even benefit to a general public, if you will. The work I did was while as a test pilot, not as an astronaut. For the standpoint of improving some things that improved aircraft safety and improved aircraft performance, including general aviation aircraft, the kind that, a person would go over to Gulfport Field and fly a Cessna 150 or whatever.
Right.
So I put one program 1.5 years testing that whole class of airplanes, seven aircraft I took through complete test programs of the general aviation type with suggested changes to Part 25, I think it is, FAA criteria for design for improvements in some of those aircrafts, which did have some things I thought would greatly enhance the pilot workload. Pilots that fly those airplanes generally have lower flight time experience and don't fly, in some cases, don't fly often enough to be proficient. So it pays to have an airplane that flies nice for that class of pilots. So, but at any rate, that's what I did for 7.5 years before applying to be an astronaut. And 1966.
What is it from? You're talking to two guys who are not aviators that have Joey's only been on a plane a few times, and he's nervous about getting on a commercial aircraft here in a couple months. What makes a guy like that, like you, want to go into the test side? Because to me, seems very scary, right?
No. You try to make it not scary. Just actually the heritage of what was done in the space program to try to approach our next mission or flight safe. A lot of the principles were what was done in aircraft flight test. You worked with engineers that were also assigned. You had, for any given program you had, be it a small program or a bigger program like the X-15 rocket ship we had at Edwards. That thing launched from the B-52, could go up over 50 miles, many flights. Some flights went over 60 miles high.
Wow.
And in those days, launching from a B-52. But even a small program like the light airplane program, I was on 1.5 years with 7 different aircraft. Our team was, I had 2 engineers, a senior engineer and the one that normally flew with me a lot of the flights, and the mechanic that in some cases we modified the aircraft, added instrumentation to collect data on an oscillograph, a photo panel, that kind of stuff to collect the data we needed. But you thought through carefully in each case the flights you're going to fly and data were you going to collect and what the profiles you would fly or maneuvers you'd do to collect the data. So it's all pre-thought out and also thought out for problems you may have and how you would handle those problems. And other higher speed aircraft, of course, some things you always worried about contingency. Of course, the airplane world, the kind of fighters and jet airplanes I was flying mostly had ejection seats.
Okay.
So you always had an ultimate plan B that was overcome the worst of the worst. But nevertheless, you carefully approached, and if you thought you're going to be near margins of some kind for like handling qualities, like I did on the flutter test I did on one aircraft, you very slowly, incrementally increase your speed or to the next data point. And since we didn't have telemetry, we'd actually land, collect the data off the cellograph. The engineers would do the analysis before we would proceed to the next flight to go a higher speed.
Gotcha.
In that case, you'd wrap the yoke with your back of your fist and excite the dynamics to maybe trigger the flutter. And so that was always a very safe approach to next steps, particularly if you're nearing what you thought was some edge of the envelope, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that's done in any NASA. Carefully the first flight, the capsule they did in Earth orbit. They took a big risk actually in flying the next one, just the capsule to the moon on Apollo 8, because they had not tested the landing craft yet. So they delayed that till the next flight, but then you flew an Earth orbit mission with the landing craft before it ever went to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So it was again an incremental buildup before taking the bigger steps. In fact, Apollo 10 that went to the moon actually did not land. It went down within 6 miles of the surface and did not land. So it did everything but land before Apollo 11, the next mission, landed. So again, always incremental.
Right.
How you take the risk.
Yeah.
When did wanting to become an astronaut, when did that come onto your radar, so to speak? You said that you were at NAC acronym, right? That just became NASA.
Right.
So
and then it became NASA. Yeah, and I as I said, I early on when the original 7 were picked the year I joined NASA. These were old, very senior individuals, much older than I was, and had many years' experience. And so I knew I wasn't in a qualifiable range yet. So that's why I stuck with the aircraft test for 7 years. Still not thinking that I would ultimately even apply to be an astronaut. I was having, frankly, too much fun flying so many different kinds of aircraft. There were sometimes 1 month in particular I picked when they asked me to go back to Edwards and talk about the good old days later in my life at the Flight Research Center. That was what was now named Armstrong after Neil. But I went back and picked 1 month, which took 2 pages on a Viewgraph show to show that month's flight record. And the 1 month I'd flown 9 different types of aircraft involved in 3 different test programs.
Wow.
Over that month. So 1 month. So it was again a lot of fun times in that respect, flying. And sort of in respect, Neil gave us a picture. Neil Armstrong. Neil actually also started at Lewis, where I did at Cleveland. And then Neil went on to Edwards and then joined the astronaut program, Neil Armstrong. Neil came back to visit one time, just passing through and stopped to our pilot's office. And we cornered Neil and asked him, Neil, what's it like being an astronaut? And Neil's answer was, well, you sit in a lot of meetings, you sit in a simulator a lot, and there's not much good flying.
Yeah.
So that was his impression of being an astronaut. So at that time, I wasn't really encouraged much about becoming an astronaut from where I was at Edwards.
Yeah, you were doing the high speed, high adrenaline stuff where you were at.
Right, yeah. But what convinced me was that what I wanted to fly was the X-15. This was the rocket ship. And it was a totally piloted vehicle. There was no autopilot. So you controlled everything from the time you launched B-52. You had the engine set and idle, a rocket engine, which was throttleable. And then you had to advance the throttle. You had to do a pull-up to a certain altitude, depending on what profile you're going to fly, to what altitude, and what maneuvers you're going to be doing. And you actually shut down the engine manually. And then you had to switch controls because as you went on up higher, past about 80,000 feet, you started losing aerodynamic controls of the aileron, rudder, pedal, elevator. So you switched to a little 100-pound, small 100-pound or less thrusters that could hydrogen peroxide thrusters that now controlled attitude. So you went to a different control system like a spacecraft do.
Right.
To now control it as you went over the top at above 50 miles to control it all the way over the top and whatever maneuvers you're going to be doing there. And then to set it up for entry. Again, the right attitude pitched up at the right angle of attack coming into the air. And dead stick, the engine, when you shut it down, that was it. You didn't have any other engine. So you're a glider all the way on the profile. And then you had to come back and find your way back to that big lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base and do your circle and approach to make a dead stick landing down in the lake bed. So it was 100% piloted vehicle, all stick and rudder.
It's
the world has so much changed. Today, SpaceX, that Dragon capsule, it has one manual control. If the things aren't going well where you can see on your screen, a nice glass screen, the parameters of the how you're going up at altitude, airspeed, etc. So if things are going awry, and they have a mission control also monitoring, but if they command you, use that control, which all that does is switch you into different software to do an abort.
Right.
That's it. So that's the total piloting.
I didn't have that.
Don't have any other controls.
Yeah. No.
So that's
technology.
The way the world has gone.
Technology has came a long way, like we were talking about earlier, from foundering lights to aircraft.
Right. Yeah. But anyway, when I figured out I wasn't going to get to fly the X-15 because it sort of went from junior to seniority status in the office, and I had two people ahead of me that were more senior that I knew would get to fly the X-15 before I did. And actually, only one of them, Bill Dana, made it before the program ended. And that's what I figured would happen. The program would end before I'd ever worked my way up. So that's when I decided if I want to go higher and faster, I'd have to become an astronaut.
Yeah.
So that's what made me sign up in 1966. Actually, late 1965, I applied. And after the selection process was picked as one of the 19 in my group, it was April of 66.
What do you think it was? Because we haven't said it yet, but like I'm hearing it, like each step of the way for you, from starting in the military at first to then being accepted as a test pilot. These are highly competitive selection processes, I would assume, right? And what do you think it was that got you into the astronaut program specifically?
Well, at the time I applied, that was my experience level, 7.5 years of flight test, and hours I had a lot of flight hours. And more than the average military pilot, even maybe just had gone through a few squadrons up to that point. And so I rated very. In fact, in a book Mike Collins wrote, I was about that. He was on the board that was involved with interviews for the final selections. He had me as number one.
Dang.
There was a group of. See, we didn't have that many applied because they wanted test pilots.
Right.
So the group, I think the whole group that applied was like a little over 500. Whereas today they get NASA's to evaluate because they want all these scientists now of all types and doctors and whatever. They have selections now are like several thousand people apply. 2,000 to 3,000 they have to go through. And so the selection criteria, just the number of hours, they put a number of hours required, your weight, height, limitations. But basically that experience and also references. You had to list 3 references that NASA would investigate. And so that, like I said, it narrowed down pretty quickly. I think a group that went through the final rigors of the week-long physical and then a little bit of a essay written thing and then the board interviews had been whittled down from that over 500 and something to like 80. So 80 in that final round. that 19 got picked.
Wow.
That's yeah,
crazy.
that's impressive. That means, I mean, you cut through on that for sure.
Yeah.
How exciting was that to get selected when you find out? Like, what does that feel like?
Well, I was very happy that I made it, and a little unhappy, and my family wasn't too happy about moving again, because we now left California and I was married to Mary Griffin Grant. My first wife was in high school with me 2 years behind. She graduated in '52, and so Mary Griffin she kind of liked moving back to Houston, because where we were living in Lancaster, California, a city that was about 50-mile drive from Edwards. It was closer to home, because she grew up in
Right.
Boston.
Yeah.
And so that move was good. Houston was still a pretty good drive.
Yeah.
It's about 400 miles
Yeah.
from Houston. So at any rate, that was good in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you got picked, explain some of the training and stuff that you had to do right off the bat. I'm sure you hit the ground running, right?
Well, NASA had a program laid out for the rookies. Our program, it's on my website. Incidentally, I have a website, www.fredhaise.space. Somewhere around that website, there's that training program that was specified by NASA. It involved a lot of, first of all, classroom on the spacecraft that were being in the process of being manufactured, command and service module, capsule, and landing craft, that kind of thing. We had some aerodynamics, a lot of it repetitive for me, because I'd been through at that time, not just college, but I'd also gone 1 year to the Edwards Test Pilot School. I had 1 year in the Aerospace Research Pilot School at Edwards while I was at Edwards. And Chuck Yeager was the commandant at the time. And so anyway, I had a lot of this was kind of overlapping. They gave us some geology field trips, about 12 of them, to look at the sense of rock structure in the natural setting, and sampling protocol, if any of us eventually ended up on the moon, and also some classroom and lab brief exposure with what scientists would do with the samples should we get them back, including how they cut them into what's called thin sections, and they could look at them under a microscope, and what kind of chemistry analysis they would do to look at the context of the rock and its, what elements might be in it, that kind of thing. So, but not to make us scientists, but to give us a feeling of what we were going to be doing, collecting, and how we could improve the collection selection, because the moon photography that was available when those missions were done was not to the fidelity that they could see on the ground, what you call major units, which were like where craters were, where hillocks were, where even some pseudo mountain ranges or hillocks were. And so they could lay out a traverse that would try to cover what they thought would be the different aspects of samples they wanted to collect, to better tell the heritage of what was in that area on the moon, how it had formed, and with some of the samples, they would age state, so you could even then build the historic story to a degree. So they wanted us at least versatile enough so that when we got down there on the surface, with a better real-time viewing, we could change the path and the choice of samples we would take that they did not have the fidelity of from the photography of that site that we were going to land at. So they wanted to make us, I call it, very good field geology observers, and follow a strict protocol of collection, sampling, that was we collected in bags that were numbered, and they could backtrack to what had been found and what location, and to take a strict photographic profile. Every sample you took, you took a certain set of photos, not just one, even one that should move sideways to get a three-dimensional picture, and views of the surrounding area to get it in situ of where you had picked it up exactly. So you did a lot of that kind of work to make you a good field geologist, I'll call it, not a scientist.
A high-paid photographer, huh?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, in addition to having to learn how to fly the spacecraft.
In addition, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is that part of the training like? The more of the spacecraft side of it?
Well, the primary simulator closest to the flight situation were computer-driven simulators, both for the command and service module and the lunar module. The ones we used, unfortunately, from the standpoint of family life, were down at Kennedy Space Center. Mm-hmm. So that's where we spent a lot of time in those simulators. I trained for 4 missions back to back. Apollo 8, the first one to go to the moon. I backed up Buzz Aldrin on 11. And then 13, I flew. That was an 8-month training cycle. And then I trained over a year as a backup commander of Apollo 16, hoping I'd get to fly 19. 19, I would have cycled to go back to the moon. And so that you spent a lot of hours in those simulators. They could emulate all through the computers, which are pretty okay compared to today. But nevertheless, they could simulate and give you an instrument panel with all the instruments working just like the real systems were. And the normal readings, all the switches, circuit breakers, everything was exactly like the vehicle. You laid in couches, just like in a capsule. And while you're doing these simulations, they also could impart failures out of the so-called credible failures that have been devised through the design effort by reliability engineering, mostly, that were considered credible failures. They could do over 300 in the command module, the capsule. They can impart over 300 failures. And so the sims, sometimes we ran initially standalone with just the simulator operators and would actually call for a sequence of failures to get our familiarity with the what we call malfunction procedures and how to handle failures. Then we ran what was called full fidelity integrated simulations, where we could be in these simulators at Kennedy. In fact, we could be doing landings. We could have the command module pilot and the capsule simulator, and the lunar module pilot and the commander could be over next door, right next door to it, in the landing craft simulator. Mm-hmm. Those could be tied and also tied to mission control in Houston. So at the same time, the people in mission control will see on their scopes exactly what we would be seeing equivalent of how the systems were operating. On our instrument panel, they would see the same thing. If a failure was put in, same way, we'd see the caution warning light come on, and manifestation of any readings that varied. Mission control would also pick up the same thing on their scopes for the various system operators. So those will run full fidelity, and they will also run by virtue of a team called Sim Soup, that in the background for each of these action sims, be there launches, might be a half a day of launches, or a half a day of entries, or a half a day going in the lunar orbit and preparing to land, and then landing on the moon. So they were running sort of mission sequences, but for each of these runs where mission control was involved, this group called Sim Soup devised and spent a lot of time working on it, what failures to import at what time. Mm-hmm. So they chose from that repertoire of that 300. It was less than that in the LEM. I think it was a little less than 200 in the lunar module. But they would pick failures that would test us. They would test us and test mission control on handling things that didn't go quite normal.
Yeah.
So that's what we went through. That's thousands of hours of that kind of simulation. Now, the lunar surface work, EVAs, was done in a different way. There was a fake lunar field out behind the training building at Kennedy Space Center. You know, it was a sandy cleared area. It didn't look like a lunar field, but nevertheless,
Right.
we had it laid out and had to follow a traverse on our cuff checklist, just like we would the moon, and a fully suited in the suit, pressurized, and with a very light backpack on. There was just a foam material with a radio in it, though, that we could use to talk. And the suit tech normally was behind us with a carriage holding the things that fed us the air to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And also had the cooling water to supply to our inner garment to keep us cool. And we'd do that 4.5 hours, 5 hours out on that fake lunar field, following our cup checklist to do this traverse and do the tasks that were called out at certain places that had to be done on the mission, using the tools, same tools would be used on the mission. Those sims all total ended up sometimes being 6-7 hours, because we started them in a big LEM mock-up, a full-scale LEM lunar module,
Mm-hmm.
in the high bay of a training building in there, and would practice getting into our suit and getting up to the point of pressurized, following that checklist, and ready to open a hatch. And then we'd deflate the suit, take our helmet and gloves off, open a hatch, and we'd climb down the ladder to the ground, because you wouldn't want to do that in a pressurized suit in one piece. And when we get in the bottom, they'd repressurize. The suit techs would be there. We'd repressurize, and then we'd do all the things around the base of the landing craft, like later missions. Actually, they had a training rover. You would have to take off the descent stage and set it up, take it off and unfold the wheels, and set it up to run, and get all the equipment off. There's a little thing that sprung out on the lower stage that had all the tools, lunar tools, and all that kind of stuff, and the TV camera and all that stuff to set up. So you go through the whole setup you do just at the LEM. Then you stop again, they depressurize the suit. You'd walk over to where they had a pickup truck with the tailgate down, and you'd hop on the tailgate, and they'd take you out to the lunar field. So you'd do the whole lunar field exercise. Then you'd come back in, depressurized, and go through the same exercise now in reverse, getting back into the LEM cabin. So it's kind of an end-to-end of what you're doing. Any of those, you'd be squishing in your boots by the time, even with the cooling inside, you would perspire so much.
Yeah.
And you said
collected in your boots.
You said a full suit minus the backpack. So, and that's without the 1/3 gravity.
No, it wasn't real. You couldn't have walked around with a real backpack on.
Yeah, as I say, without the luxury of the 1/3 gravity, that
right.
still, I'm sure, was heavy.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the kind of things we're doing for hours and hours, lots of hours.
Train and train again, and then prepare for things to go wrong. While you're doing all that, and you said you were doing a workup for Apollo 8, but wasn't selected or wasn't on that mission.
Well, as a backup, you trained to go fly. You did everything the Prime did,
right?
Except you suffered the disappointment when launch came. Somebody else flew.
Yeah, and that's
go fly. It turns out on our mission, we changed out a crewman 2.5 days before launch.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Schweigert filled in for Ken Mattingly 2.5 days before. The week of launch, you could have changed out the whole crew, and it wouldn't have made any difference.
Yeah,
so you did all the same work as if you're going to go fly, but yet you didn't get to go fly if you're backup.
Well,
so.
What would be like somebody gets sick or something come up? What would they switch a crew member out for?
Well, in our case on Apollo 13, we all got exposed to measles.
Oh, yeah.
German measles, and that week before launch, Charlie Duke, who was my backup, actually, had his son at a birthday party. That one child had German measles, and they got exposed. And so we all took blood samples, and Ken Mattingly, unfortunately, Ken had never had measles as a child.
Oh.
So his blood testing indicated that he would get measles during the mission time. The incubation period would have him coming down with German measles.
And if I remember from the movie correctly, he never did get the measles. Is that correct?
Never did. He died at 81 or 82, not about 2 years ago, and not no more longer than that, 4 or 5 years ago. And Ken had never gotten measles his whole life.
Yeah.
Dang,
So
he had to sit out.
he got removed and never had it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason that NASA's policy was that way because they did not want to ever cancel a launch if they could possibly do it because of a crew problem. Because if you miss a launch, see, you're going to have to wait 28 days. So the moon went around 28 days to get back in the right spot again to launch again. So they never wanted to stop everything and slip 28 days.
That makes total sense.
They just throw somebody else in there.
Well, they were already ready though. They were already trained up and ready.
Yeah.
What is it like when you're going through that training though, especially with Apollo 8, knowing that you could, like just like you said, just that easily day of launch be activated, for lack of a better term. What is that like when you go to bed at night and you're just sitting there thinking like, hey, I may be walking on the moon here at any time. What is that like psychologically?
No, you're just like preparing for a big football game or something. You know, you've done all the preparation and training, and if your coach is good, he's got you in the right mental state. Thinking that you're going to be able to perform what you need to do, and that's your what most concern, frankly, is that I'm going to screw up something.
So hyper focused on the training and the being in the right routine. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Not a lot of time to just brace.
Yeah. No, actually, on 8 and 11. I went into the capsule about midnight on 8 because I was in the closeout crew. So I was one of the 6 people that were involved, both company, in that case, North American people, and NASA quality, and the chief, the gun event, the Pad Führer, who bossed the whole crew, the 6, and our job was to get the capsule ready for the crew. So I went out midnight and went with the launch director on the radio, setting up all the switches. So I got the cockpit ready for set up to that point for the crew to get there and enter and get strapped in. I helped the suit techs, help them hand the suit tech hoses and straps to help the crew get strapped in. And then I had to crawl out underneath the couch to get out and crawl out the hatch till I was the last person out of the capsule. And then they closed the hatch.
That's cool.
We left and went about 2.5 miles away to wait. If there was an emergency, we're going to have to go back in and rescue. So we were in the rescue crew. If something had gone wrong, we would have to go back and get the crew. And get them out, even in the case of an abort, to help get them out. I did the same thing on 11, the first landing mission. I was in the closeout crew. So I did the same thing for Neil and Mike and Buzz on that mission. I was at the last one out of the capsule before they was hoping maybe I'd stay aboard, but they wouldn't let me.
Sneak in there.
That's awesome. You mentioned all the scenarios that you go through for the training and preparing, right?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that y'all didn't have a training protocol for what actually happened to you.
No, but because it was an explosion.
Right.
See, the FEMA's, that reliability engineering, when they evaluated the systems and all components, every valve, every switch, every wire shorted or open, valve fail closed, fail open. They wrote a report, and it was called a FEMA, failure mean effects analysis, that would give the manifestation of that failure should it happen. Explosions, there was nothing planned or further. There was no alternate plan or further to do for explosions, because their analysis said you will lose the vehicle and you'll lose the crew.
Right.
Wow.
So we found ourselves on 13 in kind of an unknown area where we were still around, still breathing, and had this explosion. So it wasn't a rocket engine or the big propellant tanks. It was a simple oxygen tank. But nevertheless, there was not an immediate book called Plan B to go
Right.
for mission control to go grab off the shelf, and which they would for most all those failures that were credible. And the particular system guys at each of those consoles had their books to handle anything like that failed, and their system components. So it was kind of starting from scratch from when we had that explosion to initially get into troubleshooting, because we had 2 oxygen tanks, and it looked for a little bit like the second tank was okay, but then mission control picked it up before we did, that had a slow leak for some reason. So we went through various troubleshooting scenarios over about 50 minutes before everybody had run out of any ideas on how to stop the leak, and knew that ultimately we would lose totally the second tank and all the fuel cells and all the electric power. So that's when Jim and Lovell and I were asked to go power up the landing craft.
You've mentioned your experience on flying these aircraft and going up, so high that you have to switch over to fly it almost like a rocket anyway. So the training that you've done, when that happens, do you just like instantly go into problem solving mode and there's no time to really be afraid? Or
no, it was systematically for that 50 minutes with mission control and system experts, including telephone calls quickly to the manufacturers, even engineers, discussions on how to stop that second leak, how to isolate it. And that's what I'm saying, man. We just followed instructions.
Gotcha.
They isolate this, be throwing certain switches. And so we were just following instructions from mission control. We weren't inventing anything on
right.
board.
But you had to stay calm. You had to think under pressure.
Yeah,
that's
right.
the thing. Yeah.
And then Jim and I asked to power up the LEM. See, we had a book, a checklist, pretty thick book, that was LEM activation, lunar module activation, that we would have used when we're getting the LEM ready to go land on the moon, the day we're going to go in and power it up. Mm-hmm. So we had a starting point to do that. And that was kind of ad-libbed in real time as I went, because as I went, I knew losing the capsule, which was never, the mothership was never supposed to be ever lost or powered down. There was a lot of things we wouldn't need, and particularly since we now also weren't going to land on the moon. So I just put big red X's in the book through rendezvous radar, landing radar as I went, UHF communication that would only be used for rendezvous, say, for instance. I knew we wouldn't use the landing radar. We weren't going to land on the moon. We can use rendezvous radar because we're going to be lifting off the moon to do a rendezvous. So saving power almost from the start as we powered it up, just eliminating parts of that checklist to not power on things that would start consuming the LEM batteries. Mm-hmm. There's a secondary problem we faced immediately was the lunar module on a normal mission, had we landed on the moon, was virtually designed and had batteries, 6 batteries, 4 in the descent stage, 2 in the ascent stage, that were meant to last virtually 2 days, plus some reserve. So here we were, where we were at the time, it was a 4-day trip back to Earth.
Oh, that's not good.
That ain't good.
So we now had a vehicle that we need to save virtually half the power in the batteries, consumption-wise, hourly consumption-wise. So I got it down to, in my mind, actually, Jim asked me to calculate, could we make it at one point after the very first maneuver got done, which was done as soon as we got the LEM powered up and configured to had us do a maneuver that put us around the moon. See, we were not in the direction to go around the moon. If we'd done nothing from there at that point, we would have not gotten back. We weren't in a direction to get back to Earth. So the first thing we did was change, they had us do, was change the path to circle around the backside of the moon, and got a breather. And I just assumed from where I was, I assumed we could go down to 18 amps power on a 30-volt DC system, and computed, watt hours, if you will.
Right.
And I had us getting back on power barely, and I had us running out of water for cooling. You wouldn't think you needed for cooling because we got into it thinking very cold, but just electronics to stay alive, what little we had on needed cooling to not to be too hot.
Right.
And so I figured we'd run out of water was the one commodity. Well, oxygen, we had lots and lots of oxygen. We had those two backpacks we're going to use on the moon, backpacks used on the moon.
Yeah.
An emergency bottle on that for a hole in the spacesuit, potentially. It was pressurized to 6,000 psi of oxygen. So each of those emergency tanks was about a day's worth alone.
So you were confident.
I never even computed oxygen. I knew we had lots of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's what I went through. Now, Mission Control, with a lot more brain power, eventually got us down to about operating at about 12.5 amps on a 30-volt system. So you do 30 volts times amps, you get watts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people if they're sitting at home on their sofa and they got a lamp on each end, a light on each end of that sofa, and put it up to the third click for the light bulb that's normally in there, that's the total power we were consuming.
Wow. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Oh, going around the moon.
Get all the way home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for brief periods, we did several maneuvers to get us back. Well, we stayed pretty much excepting losing that radar and those radars and UHF. We stayed pretty well powered up till we got past the maneuver 2 hours after we passed the backside of the moon. They had us do a major maneuver. It was actually the longest use of the descent engine we made. And that speeded up our return, changed the shape of the trajectory coming back. That cut 10 hours off our return.
Oh, wow.
That saved a lot of battery power, obviously. 10 hours of usage.
Yeah, Joey and I talked.
We used the descent engine one more time, but it was a very short maneuver, and we did that all manual. By then, we had shut off the computer. We had no computer. After we shut it off after that second burn, passing the moon, a couple hours.
Yeah,
took the battery off. I mean, the computer off completely.
Yeah, at any point were y'all just like, what's gonna happen?
No, there was uncertainty of whether they're gonna make it.
Yeah.
And actually, another concern was the command module itself. Because we were obviously misusing it, powering it completely down, and it froze. The water tanks froze in that vehicle, so it was below freezing for most of that 4 days. So it exceeded greatly the specifications on the avionics or electronics in that spacecraft.
Yeah.
And then powered it back up, and there was water everywhere. When Jack and I powered up the capsule, and that wasn't very long before entry. They wouldn't let us power it up too quick because we were using the very small batteries we had for entry. They were only made to get you through entry. Or 3 entry batteries. So they delayed us. I don't think we started the power up to about 4 hours before we were going to hit the air.
That's insane.
36,000 feet a second or 25,000 miles an hour we're whistling in. So we got in there to power it up. We had to get towels out and wipe the instrument panel off. There was water everywhere. And we knew Jack worried, he thought of it more than I did. There was probably water behind the panels on wiring. So when we first put the first steps in the activation checklist were to push in all the circuit breakers. There were 2 panels, one on the left side and one on the right side. So Jack told me, I'll give you a countdown. And he said, he was a command module pilot. He knew that vehicle well. He said, only push in 6 circuit breakers on any row and stop. He said, we'll stop a few seconds and see if we smell anything burning.
Oh, that's not
like insulation from wiring or what.
Right.
So that's why we went through that activation, pushing in the circuit breakers. So we got that done, and we figured we were probably okay, and continued on with the normal startup of the capsule. But systems worked terrific. He flew the thing through entry, and he left it. The computer got the computer back on, all aligned, the platform aligned, and set up with a blunt-end heat shield, and let it fly automatic. It flew automatic all the way through entry.
Wow.
And we tied as best they could measure where you splash down relative to the ship's position planned we tied for the second most accurate splashdown of the program. Even after abusing that thing that way. Yeah.
Cockpit full water, no power, and still second most. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pilot right there to mention that.
Right.
I love that. Yeah. Still tied for second, baby.
Miracle, I guess, Apollo 13.
100%.
That's right. Yeah, Joey and I mentioned this when we were talking before, about tonight, and we were like, I said, there's a lot of guys that have the perspective of being on the moon. Not a lot, a very few, but I was like, Fred and that they have the only perspective. You're the closest that anyone ever came to being lost in space, and I don't know psychologically.
Yeah,
that's heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other than obviously the very tragic incidents on shuttle.
Right.
Sure, absolutely. I just meant like when y'all were out there,
right? Where we'd have been just trapped, floating around till we passed away. Yeah,
correct. Yeah, that's
both Challenger and Columbia were both very dynamic tragedies.
Correct. Those were tragic, like you mentioned. We want to be respectful of your time, but I do appreciate you chatting with us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned is the astronaut community still a tight-knit community, being so few of y'all?
No, the misnomer people have, the people you got to know most were the people you were assigned on missions with. Because remember I told you our training was in Florida, most of it, or you're out on geology field trips around the country, or even went some overseas. You were never in the astronaut office much.
Okay.
I trained over two years on those 4 missions. And so the rest of the people back in the office I'd see passing when I briefly got home for 2 or 3 days and changed my underwear to head back out again. You'd see them in the office, and occasionally Deke Slayton would call a general meeting. If the Air Force had a T-38 accident, they'd want us briefed on why the accident, that kind of thing, because we were flying the T-38s. They were a taxi cab getting around the country. And so you'd see the whole group generally at that kind of thing. But that's the only time I got to see a lot of people.
Okay.
So no, you were much closer to people like in the squadrons I was in.
Okay.
Every day in the ready room, and flew with most of them at least once a month as a mission daily flight schedules changed. But you got to know people close that way. And then in the Apollo program, you got to know both the prime and backup crews on a mission assignment, because you were together a lot, both of you. And a support crew. We had a support crew that supported us. And of course, you got to know, obviously, the training people real well.
You mentioned Charlie Duke a second ago, and I don't know if you follow like any up-to-date stuff and podcasts or anything, but he just recently did a podcast not too long ago. Actually, as we were finding out that we might be connected with you, the every so few years the whole moon denying thing pops up into like the social consciousness. And that's what the podcast that Charlie did was about. What's your take on that kind of stuff? How does that feel to you, being someone who was out there and did it?
Yeah.
Well, obviously I was extremely disappointed at the time. But within 6 weeks after I splashed down on 13, Deke called me in and gave me that assignment as the backup commander on 16.
Mm-hmm.
And the normal mission cycle was 3 missions. So, and I was assigned Jerry Carr and Bill Pope. He was the crew he assigned me. And so I figured we'd circle after 16 flew. I backed up John Young on that as backup commander. I figured we'd go fly 19.
Okay.
So I was happy again. I was going to get to go back to the moon on 19. Incidentally, the capsule, first stage of that launch vehicle, Saturn V, I captured at Michoud. It was sitting outdoors for a while, but I got the money. So we got it at Infinity Science Center.
Okay.
Museum I've been working with for over 20 years over there by on I-10 north of St. Louis.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I know what we're
So that's the
talking.
one that's parked outside there. That would have been the first stage of 19.
Okay. Yeah, I was referring to people that the moon deniers, the one that say we never went. And it was That's what Charlie was recently talking about on the podcast.
I've never encountered one directly like Buzz did and had to punch him.
I saw that clip. It was that guy that was what Charlie was talking to recently.
But when he was swearing the Bible. But
Yeah,
no,
Art
I tell
Sybil.
people, I said, well, think about it. We had peak of the program about 11 when 11 flew to the moon the first time to land. We had over 400,000 people employed through the prime contractors, their subcontractors, and piece part manufacturers. There were contracts in every state in the continental United States except South Dakota. That was the only state that got left out with not some business on Apollo. And I said, now, how do you think you could keep a secret
Yeah.
among
many
400 something thousand people that were working diligently 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to make that initial schedule to get there by the end of the decade? I said, Grumman, when I was there 1 year working on the capsules before I got my first crew assignment, Grumman test operations went 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That whole year only shut down 1 day.
Wow.
This is Christmas Day.
Christmas. Yeah.
That was it. And I said, that was pretty much the way it was across the program. Now, why do you think people would be working that way, 400 something thousand people, for a joke?
Right.
Something didn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Y'all have a very unique perspective because you were there. You saw it.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So, well, we really appreciate your time.
Yes,
This was
sir.
a great conversation. I appreciate you taking time out of your evening to chat with us.
One more thing. The one thing that actually gave me the greatest, I call it single satisfaction of a job I had for one period of time, was early space shuttle. I left the astronaut office and moved to building 1 where the program office was. So now using more of my engineering, for 4 years, I was in the program office working for the program manager for the orbiter vehicle of shuttle. So I was in on all the, from day one, from the evaluating the proposals to pick who would build it through the entire design phase. I was in the program office. Sat on the engineering board looking at every engineering design change that was made on orbiters, at least the initial 2, Enterprise and Columbia, and then got to go fly Enterprise. So I got to go fly Enterprise, the first one we built, on top of the 747 for 5 test flights, back at Edwards, where I was way back when as a test pilot. So I got to separate 3 times off the top of the 747 as a glider, to land at that big dry lake at Edwards. So it was kind of like a mini X-15 experience. We launched from the B-47, get us up to about 30,000 feet.
Yeah.
So that's where we would separate.
What a career you've had. That
was kind of a wound to tomb episode, and I'm very proud of it's all total. It's been like 5 years in that endeavor.
What's it like for you nowadays to see? You mentioned SpaceX and what Elon Musk is doing and how technology has evolved, and then even also this new
project
to go back to the moon.
Yeah, some people will say, "Well, that's taking down NASA for the role he's doing right now." He's invented the reuse of these vehicles. Some of that first stage, I think one of them's flown like 9 or 10 times and been reused. It's much cheaper. So for the mission he's doing now, the Earth orbit supporting space station, taking people, cargo up and down, much cheaper than Space Shuttle. Space Shuttle was a very sophisticated vehicle. It was obviously essential to get the space station built, to carry the larger pieces up that had to get put together up there. But for just resupply kind of work, it's had more capability than needed.
Right.
So the SpaceX's operation is much more efficient. Fewer people, fewer payroll, reuse of the vehicles, much cheaper.
Yeah. They just saved 2 of them or brought 2 people back home, didn't they? Didn't SpaceX? Yeah, they were the only ones who can get to them.
Yeah. No, their capabilities remarkable. I mean, it's very safe. I worry about them because they got so many engines on these things, but they're low pressure engines, methane, very low pressure. So they're not like the shuttle engines, for instance, with very high speed turbines, high pressure. So I still worry about them with all those engines. So I hope they got a good quality. They obviously have a good quality program.
Yeah.
Are you excited to see us aiming to go back to the moon?
I hope we do. I mean, the main problem has been, as you know, is budgeting.
Right.
NASA, unfortunately, many people I speak to, and I speak to a lot of people and have over the years, they think NASA just has a big bank account somewhere they can just use however they want. But it really depends on annual budget cycles through Congress. And obviously, initially, the support of the administration and Congress to want to do whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been, Artemis has been underfunded. That's why it's been slipping.
Mm-hmm.
Hadn't flown when it was originally intended, for instance. It's probably it'll be a year and a half down on this flight coming up next February to make that, because of simply the funding level wasn't there.
That's right. Yeah, it's exciting. I hope we do it.
Yeah.
Fred, what's the secret to longevity and such a great memory? You got a better memory than I do, and you've lived a full life with a lot of experience.
Well, I would think it's not just led a good life overall, but I've kept pretty clean. I've never smoked in my life. I've never drank very much. In fact, I hadn't drunk alcohol in 20 years.
Wow.
At all.
We're out.
I've not done any of those things that get some people in trouble. But the genes, I guess I've got good genes. My granddad, and I mentioned that in my book I wrote, Granddad Haise, Harry Haise, who was a building contractor and was involved in the building of the Nativity Church in Biloxi, the current, what City Hall today, the original post office building, the Elks building, which is gone now. He was a contractor on that. But he lived to be 99 and a half.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He was, as a schoolboy, 4th grade in Springfield, Illinois, when he was growing up. He attended Abraham Lincoln's final interment services.
Oh, wow.
They had a number of school children out, I guess, for that exercise after Abe had been shot and killed. And he was taken on a train around the country and made various stops for people. And he ended up in Springfield, where he was finally interred. So my granddad was at Abe Lincoln's final interment.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to tell us all them oysters you ate as a kid back home was the secret to the longevity.
That's good.
No, it's amazing. I think of Granddad, and I say, if I go back to his great grandparents and cycle those years, that was when there were kings and queens in England that were chopping people's heads off.
Right.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, that's just time is shorter than we all think.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you gotta make the most of it.
Yes, sir.
I'm doing that now. I have Zooms with schools and civil air patrols. This year, December 18th, I did my last one with the school in Seattle, 12th graders. And this year, I've done 84 events.
Yeah.
84 school and civil air patrol events.
So you're not slowing down. You're not slowing down at all.
I'm trying not to. I'm trying not to.
What do you have planned for 26?
Well, I got events now scheduled out in May with schools out through next May.
Okay.
And I quit traveling though. Traveling's a real hassle. I have to use a rollator walker. I got 3 of them actually in different configurations. But I got neuropathy in my feet. No pain. I don't take any medicine. It's not curable. It's old age. And but I have balance problems.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I don't use those walkers hanging on to regularly, I can fall.
Yes, sir. Well, I was going to say, if you ever make it back to Biloxi, we'd love to hang out and talk to you in person, but that sounds like maybe not the case.
Okay. Well, I've known a few Seymours along the way.
Yeah, yes, sir.
I just talked to one of my old classmates, Felcher. Billy Felcher was actually in my high school class. Jimmy Garner was another name you may know. Jimmy Garner was in my high school class.
Okay.
How many left? Our class was 95 or 96.
Wow.
When I graduated. Yeah. 1950.
Yeah. That wasn't a lot of people there.
No,
that's for sure.
not at all.
Yeah.
Well, look, this has been a great interview, and we appreciate you jumping
right.
on here with us. And
Enjoyed it.
just a great story. You have a wonderful evening. We couldn't be more proud to have spoke to you this evening.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Well, keep searching and keeping Biloxi history, coast to coast, I should say, Gulf Coast history there.
Yes, sir.
With your
We will
podcast.
do it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Take care.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
evening.
All right. That was
Well,
killer.
oh man, I was smiling the entire time. That was a great
Fanboy.
interview. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's got a statue down there at the foot of the 110 for a reason. So I don't know, Joey. I'm gonna go ahead and shut this one down and keep smiling for the rest of the evening, I guess.
Yeah, that was a good one. 100%.
Yep. Yep. So we want to thank everybody for watching on the live and on the replay, man. If y'all keep tuning in, we'll keep doing them.